Okay, take two. I doubt anyone is still here. I apologize for technical difficulties. I just got a new computer like yesterday, and I haven't had any video calls yet. And so I hadn't tested that the microphone was not going to work. Camera worked. I expected the microphone to work, but I had to reset the camera in the entire computer. So thank you all for sticking around or watching the recording. I was talking to myself for a good, I don't know, 5 minutes about this problem of space debris. And, what do we do with all this stuff in space? Not even space debris, it's space sustainability. And first off, I just want to again thank you for tuning in and also wishing you a happy International Cosmonautics Day, International Day of Human Spaceflight, Uri's Night, whatever it is you wish to call it. So, celebrating the first person to launch in space and the anniversary of the first space shuttle launch, STS-1. So, exciting day for space. I'm going to be talking a bit about the other exciting things that have happened in the past week, such as my road trip to see the total solar eclipse. So, I'll be talking about that at the end. I do appreciate you guys telling me whether or not you saw the eclipse. Did you see partial, total? How did it go for you? I actually am really curious because I see wonderful photos, but I don't know about like everybody's real life experience and how it went for you and whether you loved it or not. So please let me know in the comments or the chat. So the reason why I want to talk about today's topic, there was a story a couple of weeks back about a piece of space debris falling through somebody's house in Naples, Florida. There was a pallet of batteries 3 years ago, so March 2021, that the astronauts took from the International Space Station. They picked it up with the Canadarm. They released it into space. They put it in a trajectory to deorbit. It was the largest piece of space debris ever to be deorbited. The European Space Agency, ESA, said there was like no chance that it would, not burn up. However, people who track these things did think that there was a chance that pieces or some of it might not completely burn up in the Earth's atmosphere and actually hit the Earth's surface. Now, the likelihood of it hitting a person, property, inhabited property is low. However, this person in Naples, Florida, who was not home at the time, but their son was home, said that a cylindrical piece of space debris, about 2 pounds, I don't know what that is in kilometers, it went through 2 stories of their house. And that is a problem because he said it almost hit his son. It could have hit somebody. It did damage to his house. They're still right now in the process of confirming it was space debris from the International Space Station, but pretty much assume it is because people who tracked it expected it to re-enter at that time that it did. It was a pallet of batteries. So a exposed pallet 9 is what it's called. It was about 2.6 metric tons or 5,800 pounds of spent nickel hydrogen batteries. And so the entire pallet didn't survive, right? It was just one of these batteries, one of these cylindrical batteries that went and survived and hit somebody's property. And that is why I want to talk about deorbiting versus repurposing or recycling today, because it can become much more of a problem in the future. Now, what is already a problem is the fact that we have a lot of stuff in space. And I am not the kind of person who thinks that that is like a problem in and of itself. The phrase is reduce, reuse, recycle. And I don't think we should reduce. Others disagree with me, especially people concerned about astronomy from the surface of the planet. You see the satellite trails, and that interferes with pictures. So some people do want to reduce the amount of satellites or things in orbit. I'm not one of those people. I think it's fantastic. We can't turn back the clock. But what we can do is figure out what can we do about the fact that we do have a lot more space objects in orbit right now. There are over 12,000 satellites in orbit right now. And by the way, if you know of a website that accurately tracks how many satellites are in orbit, I couldn't find it. I know it's out there. I know that there's a website that tracks this kind of thing, but I don't know what it is. So please leave it in the chat or the comments if you are able to tell me. Oh no, I just closed my notes. Oh, hey, Ross, you're back. Thank you. And thank you for letting me know again that the audio was not working. 2 pounds, nearly 1 kilogram. Thank you for that conversion too. So there's a website out there that I know tracks it, but generally speaking, over 12,000 satellites in orbit, over 9,000 of them active, over 6,000 of them SpaceX Starlink. So Starlink's not slowing down anytime soon. We're going to have more satellites in space. Globally, there's a whole lot more activity in space. So we're going to continue to have satellites in space, and not only satellites, but spent rocket boosters. Not everybody is like SpaceX and recycles, refurbishes, lands back their boosters and refurbishes them. Like most companies don't do that, right? Most organizations don't do that. So we also have thousands of spent rocket boosters that are in space, and that is also growing as well. What do we do with all this stuff? And why is it a problem, right? So just a couple of weeks ago, this was February 28th of this year, NASA's timed spacecraft and a defunct Russian satellite called Cosmos 2221, they nearly collided. They became within less than 20 meters or less than 66 feet. And I'm not really good with like the geospatial distances, which is funny because like I have an astronomy background, so I can understand things like, AU and light years and, but I'm not actually good with like how big is 20 meters? 66 feet, that's like really, really small distance. That's how close these two satellites came with, between each other. And that's Leo Labs is the company that tracks that. That's insanely close. And so we are seeing much more of these near conjunctions, these close calls where a satellite might actually hit another satellite or another piece of space debris that's not necessarily just a fleck, but like something larger, and create a problem. And we know this because back in February 10th, 2009, there was the famous Iridium 33 collision. That was a U.S. communications satellite, a private satellite, collided with a defunct Russian satellite, Cosmos 2251. And that created a whole lot of space debris. It created at least 1,000 pieces of debris larger than 10 centimeters or 4 inches, and a whole lot more pieces of smaller debris. So we already know what happens if two satellites collide. It's a problem, right? Yeah, incredibly close call, says Ross. Absolutely, incredibly close call. I mean, like, when I saw that tweet from Leo Lab, my jaw dropped. Like that is as close as you can hope that, we're glad they missed is my point. So we're having a whole lot more of these conjunctions. So we do have things that are happening to try to prevent this, data sharing and all of that. But also in September 2022, the United States Federal Communications Commission, FCC, they adopted a new rule where previously there was a guideline, not even a law, but a guideline that says that you should deorbit satellites at the end of their life within 25 years of the end of their life. So let's say you have a satellite and it's done. It's done its mission. You have within 25 years to deorbit that. Well, the FCC decided to change that and they made it 5 years. So now you have a satellite, it's done with its job, and now you have 5 years to deorbit that satellite. So that's much better. I applaud that rule. And I don't know why the FCC is the one who put that into place, other than there is no government agency in the United States that's a regulatory body that is in control of how we do space activities like this. FCC, FAA, NOAA, they all have their part to play in terms of space regulations. NASA is not a regulatory body. This is a different topic, by the way. If you want me to talk about regulatory bodies in space and space law, especially U.S. space law, I can go ahead and do that. I'm not a lawyer, but I do follow this pretty closely. Basically, the FCC was the one who's like, well, it's not really our job, but we're gonna do it anyway. So any U.S. company or any company that wants access to the U.S. market, so this applies pretty broadly globally, they have to abide by this 5-year rule, which I applaud. Like, I really do think that's a good idea. It's a good idea to deorbit the bodies that we have in space right now that's no longer operating or done its job, right? Because I'll get to all the solutions in the future, but all the solutions in the future are in the future. We really don't have any other alternatives at this time, but I will get to that. So this next topic is something that breaks my heart and might break your heart too. The International Space Station. It is coming on the end of its life. It is the largest satellite that we have in orbit, aside from like the moon, obviously, the largest one we ever built. And we are planning to crash it into the ocean. And my heart breaks because I am biased. I worked on the International Space Station as my first full-time job. I helped out with scientific payloads on the ISS. And so I am biased. I love the space station. And the United States is planning not only to deorbit it in 2020 or 2030-ish, but they want to spend $1 billion. NASA put out a call in December to solicit ideas, proposals for a deorbit vehicle. They call it the US deorbit vehicle for $1 billion. So that sounds to me like such a shame and also a waste of money. $1 billion to destroy the ISS. And yes, you want to safely destroy it. So if you listen in on some of these NASA safety panels, they're public, by the way. You can tune into ASAP. You will hear them frantically talk every single time about the fact that we don't have this deorbit vehicle picked out. We don't have the deorbit vehicle like built. It needs to be deorbited safely, and I completely agree, because you don't want the ISS coming down on a population that could cause a lot of damage. It could cause casualties, etc. So I understand, but my heart breaks. And maybe you're like me. Yeah. ISS is such a success story, but it'll inevitably wear out, so it has to be deorbited, unfortunately, says Ross. Yeah, I know. So that's where we are in terms of the fact that we don't have anything better, right? There were some questions to NASA a year or two ago about like, why deorbit the ISS? Why not boost it into a higher orbit and keep it there? And honestly, NASA gave some bullshit answers. Sorry, NASA, about it'll cost X numbers of dollars and all this, like all these boosts. And honestly, I think it was just an excuse. Yes, don't have the money to boost it, but they also don't have $1 billion to not boost it, to deorbit it. So if it's going to cost $1 billion to deorbit it, I think they have better solutions, honestly. But I'm not NASA. So I'm sure they have people internally that have looked into that and decided against it for whatever reason. What happens when an object that is large is deorbited? It is not going to burn up entirely. So what happens is that we put it in a graveyard spot in the Pacific Ocean. It's called Point Nemo. It is also known as the oceanic point of inaccessibility. There is nothing anywhere close in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where Point Nemo is, and that is where we have our spacecraft cemetery. So it's not just ISS, it's other spacecraft, Mir, etc., that have gone to this general point in the Pacific Ocean where there is no human life. There is ocean life, and I do have to wonder. I did not look into this, but I do wonder if there's any kind of studies that have been done on the effect of human trash in Point Nemo or that general vicinity of the Pacific Ocean, because I mean, it doesn't do nothing, right? So now I do want to talk about the fact that not all reentries are controlled, and NASA does a really good job, because NASA does have that guideline in place, and it has for a while, as to you need to deorbit these things. But China, on the other hand, has been known for not abiding safely about deorbiting. So China's Long March 5B has unsafely, uncontrolled deorbited. And the problem with that is that it can land a population. And therefore, in 2020, May 2020, there were reports that a 12-meter long object crashed into the village. I don't know how to pronounce it. I apologize. Mahuano. I don't know. It's in the Ivory Coast. And so China, unfortunately, is responsible for not only crashing rockets in its own villages, but crashing rockets in at least another country's villages as well. So that's a problem. So if you're going to deorbit, you really do need to do it safely and controlled and make sure that you're being responsible. Another problem with the deorbit is something that came out recently, July 2022. There has been some studies done, at least one study done, where a paper published in Nature Astronomy titled Unnecessary Risk Created by Uncontrolled Rocket Reentries. Now, again, this is uncontrolled, not controlled. Uncontrolled rocket reentries, the risk, according to this study that was done by multiple people, they said there's a 10% chance over the next decade that someone will be killed by uncontrolled rocket reentries, sorry, deorbits. So that's also a problem, right? So if we are going to do this whole deorbit thing, which we should, it needs to be controlled. If there's any chance that something is not going to completely burn up, like that battery pellet, then we need to be aware of that, and we need to make sure that we're not putting it over Naples, Florida, or wherever there's a population. Some other problems also fairly new that came out in October of 2023 was a paper that was published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, metals from spacecraft reentry in stratospheric aerosol particles. And this one was interesting because I hadn't heard anybody talk about this before, but it's obvious in hindsight. They did a study of the atmosphere and compared atmosphere of normal Earth's atmosphere, upper atmosphere, to atmosphere of what you'd expect if there was space debris or space hardware that's being deorbited. And they found that 20 elements from reentry were detected or present in ratios consistent with alloys in spacecraft, including lithium, aluminum, copper, and lead. And sulfuric acid, 10% of the stratospheric sulfuric acid particles larger than 120 nanometers in diameter contain aluminum and other elements. Now, they did say that this is not something that we are breathing. So this is upper atmosphere. This is not us humans or any other animals that are breathing this. But it does make me wonder, like, what's the long-term effects of messing with Earth's atmosphere that way? And this is especially interesting because so much of what we talk about when we talk about human spaceflight is the overview effect and the ways that people understand that thin blue line of our atmosphere is what protects us, human life and all Earth life, from the darkness and death and nothingness of space. And I find that very interesting because we're messing now with our thin blue line. So what happens if we mess with it too much? Now, of course, these little bits of metal that we burn up in the atmosphere are not going to do catastrophic problems to our whole entire atmosphere. But as we do orbit more and more, it will have an effect. What's the alternative? Well, here's where we get into some future concepts that, again, are future. So they're not a problem or they're not a solution right now, but they could be a direction that we could go in. One idea, I haven't heard about this in a while, so I don't know if this is currently being worked on. But in July 2017, NASA awarded contracts called Next Space Technologies for Exploration Partnerships, or Next Step 2. And one of these awards was to NanoRacks in conjunction with Space System Floral and United Launch Alliance. And they were working on the idea, a feasibility study regarding conversion of existing launch vehicles' upper stages or propulsion segment into a pressurized habitable volume in space. So in other words, turning spent rocket boosters that are just in space, there's thousands of them, into space stations, like mini space stations, whether habitable or not. Interesting concept. I don't know if that was published, that study was published. I don't know if NanoRacks, which is now Voyager, is still working on that, or if any of those partner companies are still working on that. Voyager is currently working with Airbus on their own creation of a space station, Starlab. And so I don't think that they have decided that it's worth their time, at least, to take a spent rocket booster that's in space and convert it into a space station. They've already decided to build one on Earth and launch it. But it might be that somebody else decides that this is an interesting technology, that they are going to try to figure out how to take a spent rocket booster that's already up there and convert it into something usable. Another idea is recycling. So Cislunar Industries, they have their module space foundry, which enables the recycling of spent upper stages, satellites, and space debris, transforming otherwise dangerous material into feedstock for in-orbit manufacturing. Our recycling technology will take recovered space debris and reprocess it into standardized metal feedstock in the form of rod, wire filament, and other useful geometries. So this is not in existence yet. I know that they've been testing it. I've been working with this team for a little while. They've been testing it. They're testing stuff like this on the International Space Station. It doesn't exist yet, but I think it's a really cool concept. I actually really love the concept. So I don't know if there's any other companies. Let me know in the chat or the comments if there's any other companies that are working on any kind of material foundry, a furnace, like the idea of taking material that's already in space and breaking it down and then reusing it, similar to how we recycle in space. When I posted this live stream on Twitter and LinkedIn, I got so much feedback. Everybody seems to be in favor of recycling, except those people who brought up the fact that recycling on Earth is very complex. It's a very complex and expensive process. My own husband, who's an economist, talks to me quite frequently. I recycle, right? He recycles too, but he talks frequently about how the cost of recycling is usually so high that it's not worth it. And I can understand. But on the other hand, we have to think long term. And it might be an initial cost, especially things like batteries. Batteries, I know, are really complex and expensive to recycle. And I don't know how that would work in space. I really, truly don't. But starting with the simpler things, starting with a piece of metal and, burning that up, turning that into something else. I don't know how it works. But it seems like something that we should have the ability to do because we do that here on Earth. And if we can figure out, it's always much more complex in space, right? The microgravity environment makes fluid mechanics and all the other things that we do here on Earth and take for granted. It makes it so much more complex, but we can figure out a way to do this, and we should figure out a way to do this because we are taking finite materials, right? Some of this stuff is finite. The rare earth metals and the things that we used for the hardware in space, the electronics, the avionics, that stuff can be, really difficult to find on Earth. And why would we then just burn it up in the atmosphere? Or, in another direction, send it off into deep space? Like, I don't know if that's very responsible either. Now, I do want to bring up some legal issues because all of this is not just so easy. The Outer Space Treaty, which was 1967, signed by the majority of the world, it states that whatever government launched a rocket or a piece of space debris, a piece of space hardware, whatever country launched it is responsible for it, even if it's a private company. And also, it states that the space hardware is there in perpetuity to the owner, right? So, quote, a space party to the treaty let me reread this. A space party to the treaty on whose registry an object is launched into outer space is carried shall retain jurisdiction and control over such objects and over any personnel thereof while in outer space or in celestial body, which pretty much means that if a piece of space debris, defunct satellite, spent rocket booster is owned by a certain country, a certain company that is under a certain country, they own it forever. So they can sell it, but otherwise they own it forever. So the idea of salvage rights in space is a bit more complex, but contract salvage rights is there. So to date, a lot of the satellite servicing is to either attach to a satellite and refuel it, or take it and deorbit it, or put it into another orbit. It could be a higher orbit, or if it's a lower orbit, it's usually to put it into a reentry orbit. And that's fine because that's a contract, right? The owner is contracting with some third party to do this. And the same with salvage rights. A company or country can own something, and they, as the owner, can then contract to somebody else to do salvage. And there is no other, there is no defunct, salvage rights. I don't know what it's called in space. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Maritime law is different. Earth law is different. We don't have the same thing. If you find something in the waters, it's yours. It's not like that in space. And so if we are going to think about, if we take a piece of space debris or a defunct, say, old Soviet satellite, let's just say, it's still owned by the Russians. What are you going to do? Are the Russians going to take responsibility? Are the Chinese going to take responsibility for their boosters that they launch in space and just let land? How are we going to handle that? Because although right now the majority of the space debris is probably American, I shouldn't say space debris, the majority of space satellites and objects is probably American because of the number of Starlink satellites. I know there's a lot of Soviet debris up there, a lot of old satellites from the Soviet Union, and I don't know exactly how we're going to handle that. But thinking about the future, at least we can handle the things that are our own responsibility. And by us, I mean the United States in this context. So the United States can find a way, if there's spent rocket boosters that are U.S. companies or NASA or wherever, maybe we can handle that. Same with satellites. Let me know in the comments or in the chat what you think about all of this, how you think this will play out, because I'm not so concerned about the next 5 years. I'm thinking more like the next 50 years, the next 500 years, right? What are we going to do? Because as we continue to go outward, we're going to continue to bring more and more stuff with us. And what are we going to do? We're just going to throw it overboard? Imagine if the beginning of the highway system, there was just a few cars and they threw trash out the window. Well, now we have cars in the highways, constantly. And if everyone threw trash out the window, how much that would just be a problem, right? It's not the same analogy, but that's how I see it, is a very similar kind of thing. Should we be doing something about this problem now for future generations? And I think yes. And it's just how? What's the best way to proceed here? I did want to say that I wanted to tell you about the total solar eclipse. I know this is running long because my hardware problems earlier, but I did do a road trip with my eldest, my 8-year-old, and my baby. And we drove through several states to southern Indiana. Oh, no, we were in southern Illinois. We crossed the Indiana border into Illinois. And that was, oh my gosh, it was so worth it. It was amazing. It was the second total solar eclipse that I've ever seen. It was the longest I've ever driven to see one, because the other one from 2017 was just an hour away. I was very lucky. This one, it took us, I don't know completely, it was 7, 8 hours to get there. And I have no idea how long to get back. Some like 10 hours or something crazy to get back. It was a really terrible drive back, but it was so worth it. If you ever get a chance to see a total solar eclipse, oh my gosh, so I'm an astronomer by training. And so I understand the celestial mechanics. I understand the way that the solar system moves, but there's just something emotional that I cannot put into words. It's very humbling. It's very, like, it takes you out of your existence, and it reminds you that we humans are part of the cosmos. And I just cry. Like, I actually posted a reaction video to the total solar eclipse, a little vlog, my road trip, and also my reaction to the total solar eclipse. It's right here on YouTube. I posted it a few days ago. So if you're interested, that's just 5 minutes. I'm curious to know how you felt if you got a chance to see the total solar eclipse in person. And I know some of you saw the partial. Partial is very cool. I like the crescent, right? But there's nothing that beats a total. And now I'm wondering, in a couple of years, can I go travel to Europe or to Egypt, or, where can I go next? And so I don't have to wait 21 years to see the next one. Really hoping that someday I will be able to see another one, like, sooner than later. And I highly recommend, if you are able, that you do the same. Thank you all for tuning in, whether or not you're tuning in live. Thank you, Ross, or because of my technical difficulties watching the recording. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a great weekend.